Hey guys, welcome to the first installment, I guess, of this tutorial series I'm going to try and start up. So in this one, I figured we would try to cover some of the basics of shapes, or at least how I use them, and then also discuss layer masks a bit. So I'm just going to start up a banner. Let me see. I usually go 3000 by 1000. Usually any multiple of 1500 by 500 will work pretty well for Twitter. Let me see. I'm just gonna call this tutorial. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a shape out here like this. I'll move on to the pen tool in a bit. I'll just start off with a regular shape. So I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in over here just to see it a little better. So with Photoshop, when you have shapes, you can't I guess you can't edit them like you edit normal images. For example, like I can't like delete a little bit of it or remove certain parts just by using a typical function like a magic wand or something like that, because it's a shape layer. So just a little bit of a note on that, the shape is like a special Photoshop structure. So first thing is you'll always want to be in this tool. I use the U command, the U keyboard shortcut. So fill obviously just controls whatever the fill is of it. The next thing I like to do, which is I think one of the more important parts of using shapes, is that there's a difference between using this stroke up here where my mouse is and going over here and using the stroke command over here. So what you'll realize is that if you go to, let's say, an outside stroke, puts on a solid color that I can see. So right, it looks ugly, but I'm just trying to use it as an example. So if I keep increasing the stroke, you'll notice that the corners over here are curved rather than straight, and a lot of times that makes it look less clean, makes it look a little clunkier. So what you want to do is use the shape stroke over here. So now if I go ahead and put on this red stroke, I can go over here to this tab especially, which is an important one. It'll always stay on the solid by default, but this is the one that I use the most, the align. So I can either have it be outside, centered, or inside, and then you can go over here and control how thick it is, and you'll notice that the corners are actually straight. So I'll go back to outside because I use outside a lot. That's something really important. And while I'm on the topic of that, another thing I like to do, let's say I made a text Cyclonic, and let's see, I need to find a one that will have like a straight thing. Okay, so if I expand this out a bit, you'll notice that it's a similar thing. You'll notice that like there's straight edges right here, straight corners. So it's a similar thing where if I just went here and put the stroke on it from this layer panel, I'm going to get a curved stroke. But if I were to, let's say, go right click this and say convert to shape, and this works only with text. If I click convert to shape and then I go to the strokes, I can switch this to an outside stroke and I can increase this, and you'll notice the corners are straight. So you'll notice in several banners before, I'll have like let's say a white text up above, and then I'll duplicate that text and then have this one remain as a text layer without any stroke or anything like that. And then on the bottom, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and turn it to like no fill and then modify the stroke, and that way I can change, put layer styles on it as well. So while I'm on that topic as well, when you put layer styles on shapes, so for example, if I was to go here and let's say put a gradient overlay. So if I were to do something like that, you'll notice that it's only affecting the middle and not the actual stroke, which is another reason why I like to duplicate the text and then have the layer down below have no fill and only a stroke. So that way what happens is, now if I have this gradient overlay on there, we'll put that back on there, and then I take the fill off of it, you'll notice the gradient is now applied to the outer stroke portion of it. So I think that's a pretty useful thing to know right there. Another thing is what you'll see me do a lot in my streams is when I have a lot of my shapes are variants of a rectangle or a triangle. So you'll notice that there's like squares at the at all places around there. There's I believe 9 of them. So what you can do is using the control key, if I were to go and click on this point, I can just edit that point and make other stuff change based on it. And then if I hit control and then I hold shift as well, I can just constrain it to move in a certain line like that. And then the other thing I can do is if I go and do that on the bottom middle portion, I can do something like this. And then if I don't hold shift, I can just do something like that. So being able to use those is very useful, especially with making the shape banners that I do. Let's see. Then the other command that you might want to know is if you go into the edit and then you go to transform and perspective. This shape, if you've seen my banners, you'll probably recognize quite a lot. It's very useful for me. So it's a similar type of reasoning with the triangle, so I won't go into too much detail with that. But if I go into the pen tool now, this is one that I know I'm pretty well known for, at least in using the pen tool. So here's a little bit of a description of how it goes. So when you click down once here, then let's say you go click around some point else. If you just tap it, it'll make a straight line, and if you hold shift, it'll go to either flat, 45 degrees if you get to enough of a thing. This is 45 degrees, and then 9 degrees kind of thing. So it'll go to like the 45 degree slants and then just vertical and horizontal. But then if I click and then I hold, this thing comes up here where I can go ahead and make it a curve. But now the thing is, if you make a curve and you click to another point, you just click, it's going to make another curve on its own even if you don't want that. That can get pretty annoying when it comes to pen tooling people out of images. So what you're going to want to do is you've clicked this point and now the curves happen. This thing is called like a curve handle. So you're going to want to hold the Alt key, and you notice now it's like a weird triangle cursor. So if I do that and click on it and now drag, I can affect just that that contour right here, and now I've made it a straight line. So it kind of alternates. So if I go like curve then straight and I do this thing, now when I click again it'll be perfectly straight. Then if I go ahead and curve it, and then I go here, it's going to curve it again, but then I can go and make it straight, relatively straight again, and then click on it once more and it'll show up straight again. And then after that, you'll want to make sure, this is a big thing that I guess people weren't too aware of until I mentioned it, you'll want to make sure you're on the shape palette for using that. So that the thing is, with paths, you cannot, they're useful to just making like selections. So if you're going to select, if you're going to try and make the, cut someone out of an image, you can use the path thing and then just use the selection marquee. But otherwise, you can't, after you get a path, you cannot convert it into a shape. So what I always like to do is keep it as a shape, and then if necessary, put it on 0 fill and no stroke, so I can at least still see where I'm putting my markers and all that. But the nice thing is that even if you have it as a shape, you can go ahead and control click on this and you'll select it anyway. So you effectively get what you wanted out of the path. And then if you make the shape a 0 fill shape when you're doing the pen tooling, it'll make things a lot easier. So that's a bit of a tutorial on that. And then after that, once you get the actual shape, it works the same as just going back to this, this kind of overall shape tool and playing around with the stroke and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is, I don't know if people know how to make triangles necessarily. That might not be intuitive, but if you go to this like hexagon looking shape, it's basically a polygon, so you can make it to any sort of size side numbers you want. So obviously a triangle is 3 sides, so then you can do something like this. Now if you hold shift, you can go to specific orientations of the triangle and it'll snap to those, which makes it really easy to put them like, vertical or whatever. And the same thing, I guess another cool tip, so if you're going to go to the ellipse tool, this is the way you make a circle as well. So you can do something like this and make various shapes, or you can hold shift and then you'll be making a perfect circle. So I think pretty much that covers oh, actually nope, another thing that I wanted to discuss. So a lot of times I'll be making shapes that aren't they aren't like just a circle or just a rectangle, just a triangle, where it's easy to keep things symmetric. Sometimes I want to make like a really weird shape and then make it symmetric. But the problem is, if you're just eyeballing all of it, you're probably not going to make it all that symmetric. So for example, if I wanted to make this, sometimes you just have to eyeball it, to be honest. But like, let's say I wanted to make a shape like this, but I wanted, you know, I wanted the other half of it too to make like a kind of a T. What I would do is I would duplicate that using the Control-J command, transform it, and then flip horizontal. I can come over here now and basically just eyeball it again. And you have to sometimes play around with it. It doesn't work the easiest off the bat. But now what I can do is I can go ahead and right click on here and merge shapes. And now if you had to try and make this shape from scratch all symmetrical in one shot, it'd probably be pretty hard. But duplicating and flipping and then merging usually works pretty well for that. And then once you have it as a merged shape, you can do all your normal stroke stuff. So the reason this thing is happening is because I didn't combine, this wasn't straight enough for me to combine them well without there being white space in the middle. So what I could have done there was just kept them so it looked like the tips were barely touching, and then put like a rectangle in here and merge them all together to cover up for that space. So bunch of things you can do there to make things work. But I would highly recommend, as much as possible, if you're doing like geometry banners and stuff, keep them as shapes, because otherwise you're going to make your life a lot harder. It's a lot harder to change stuff like colors, etc. And then the last thing I wanted to go into with shapes is that, like I mentioned before, if I were just use the marquee tool and go here and like select this shape and try to delete parts of it, the layer isn't directly editable like the Photoshop's error message says, because it's a shape layer. So what I like to do is, let's say I want to remove a part of this, so I'll use the lasso tool. So let's say for whatever reason I wanted to remove part of this, what I'd do is I'd enclose that part, use the M key to go back to the marquee, right click it and select inverse. So now it's basically selecting just this portion of that layer. And then you can go down here to the layer mask, and once you do that, it basically, without turning it from a shape or rasterizing it or any of that stuff, basically using this layer mask here will just cut off that kind of portion. And let's say you want to cut off additional portions. Let's say I want to cut off more of this stuff. So making sure I'm selected on the layer mask. White area means it's visible, black area means it's not. So I want to turn this from white to black. So I'm going to make sure my white is my foreground color, and I'm going to hit delete. And then you'll notice that area, well, that area is a little hard to see over here, but that area will turn black. But you can also go the inverse way. So now if I want to come over here and do something like this, and I just want that little inside part to show, you can go back, click on this mask, flip the color. So now I want to delete black and go to white. So now if I hit delete, it shows back up again over here as part of that. And just to show that it's not just showing black because this was black, if I go ahead and change this color to green, both turn green. So I feel like that's pretty useful. So I think that pretty much ends this first installment. I'm a little new to doing these, and I've been doing them kind of informally on stream, but if you guys have any sort of questions, feel free to pop by the stream or ask them in the comments or on Twitter. So yeah, hope this was helpful.